one after the other as we go along. Now, just a bit of a brief information in terms of, when we talk about technology in education, we see a lot of technology in education every day. And today is no different because I'm using Zoom. I'm sitting in the office, and what is happening is you are also, obviously attending this particular session with me remotely by logging into Zoom and, in the comforts of your own home. So this is actually technology and the use of technology, essentially we get to see this in working actual working. So from our point of view, what we want to be able to do is when we are looking at becoming teachers, there is a lot of dependence now on technology within this particular sector. And when we do talk about technology, we are looking at understanding how it can play a very important role, or at least a role which is going to be useful and help us being more efficient and productive in terms of teaching and delivering when we do teach in primary education, secondary education, or further or higher education. So the main aim of this unit is to look at understanding how the increasing use of technology is supporting teaching and learning. And if I may ask both of you a quick question, do you see the use of technology in education? Can you think of any references where you see the use of technology in education? Any references, any idea that you see?
Sir,
Any thoughts?
in our school and in university, we are using projectile means projector to show the
Correct.
slides. So
Absolutely.
in this way,
Absolutely.
they use different websites to search the data for calculations and for theories. So in this way, they use the modern technology.
That is absolutely correct. So essentially, if you see, if I put on my thinking hat right now and just share a couple of things I add to what you have said, Amir. So there are lots of technological equipment that we use in education. So if I'll name them as equipment. So things like projector, overhead projector. You look at use of, for example, touch screens, anything to do with PCs, laptops, tablets today. We also use VR headsets, which are being used, starting to be used in medical and some engineering aspects of it. These are all usages of equipment. Now, there are uses of software. So, if we divide, Zoom is one such software, WebEx is another. There are lots of other softwares that engineers, medicine, and dentistry, other courses might use, and they could be softwares for simulation and programming, things like that. Then we use technology in terms of software like Turnitin to scan plagiarism or to look at similarity. You look at today aspects of learner management system that we are using, that is also use of technology, which allows learners or students to be able to get access to teaching and learning resources, electronically. Use of mobile and applications on mobiles which allow you to access teaching and learning material is also use of technology in education. Now, we also need to think of as teachers certain ideas wherein technology can come to our aid in terms of help us in aiding to get education. So for example, when we look at students which are dyslexic, you look at hearing in loops when you go to the bank or when you go to libraries, you have technology which allows you to use it as an add-on to get aspects of service that you need. For example, people with disability can get access to use of technology. Even now, although it is not related to education, but a wheelchair, for example, a motorized wheelchair is an example of use of technology which allows people with disability in terms of walking to be able to go from one location to the other. If I talk about Braille, in which how the text is printed, that is also use of technology, wherein people with conditions who have blindness or are blind from birth are able to use Braille language as an example to be able to use and read text and obviously communicate. Sign language is another example. So there are various usages of technology in education, but the main use of technology want to look at is how does it help me become an effective teacher, a more productive teacher, a more efficient teacher? How does it help me relate to my learners in education? And to understand, build knowledge, and obviously look at enhancing their skills. So the main aim of this unit is understanding use of technology to support education and learning, how you would understand that technology can come to aid and enhance the teaching and learning experience. Now we look at losing a lot of surveys, course surveys, questionnaires. Sometimes when you do research, you use softwares like Qualmetric, you use Google Forms. You're using this as an aid to help you collect data from learners, or users, provided you are looking at gathering data for research. So this is what technology helps us in education with. The unit will also explore how technology can address some of the main challenges faced in the education sector. So for example, today, one of the things that we look at is AI detection. Now, artificial intelligence is now becoming more or less an integral part of our lives. But one of the key challenges in education is that we, as teachers, lecturers, I also need to look at how do I see whether the assignment is written by the learner or is written using the use of software or some sort of an AI. So AI comes to our which is technology again, artificial intelligence, but it comes to our rescue because it helps us in understanding using Turnitin or PlagScan or various other softwares to see whether whether the assignment or the evidence produced by the learner is written by the learner himself. Is it human? Is it artificial intelligence and things like that? So there are lots of challenges which technology helps us overcome also in education, thereby improving accessibility. Now, one of the key things that we look at in this particular part is we will look at the word inclusion. So, when I talk about inclusion, what we also need to do is obviously, as teachers, one of the main things that we want to look at in terms of teaching is what is called inclusive teaching. Now, the reason of inclusion is that we want to be able to include everybody in the group. Now, sometimes when you are in a classroom based setting or online, you have learners who are learning with you. What sometimes you would see is that all the learners have different capabilities and, interests, and obviously their knowledge and skill levels are different. What we need to be able to do is one of the clear things in teaching pedagogy is that we need to be able to develop inclusive classrooms. That means we need to be able to include everybody and take everybody along in the process of teaching and learning. So sometimes you have learners who are brilliant, learners who are average, learners who are poor, they might need some support. So that is where when you plan your sessions, technology can come to your aid, is because you would be looking at developing methods of delivery which will be inclusive. That means it will include all types of learners, learners with disability, learners with need additional support, learners who are brilliant, learners who are average, learners who are good. And in such cases, as a teacher, your aim would be to also look at developing inclusive teaching practices which will allow which will allow probably equal opportunities to be given to all students so that they are able to learn and achieve, while you are also at the same time developing this inclusive nature of teaching, because you are looking at promoting what is called you're not looking at, let's say, favoring any particular learner, but what you're looking at is providing equal opportunities to all the learners who are also able to then get those opportunities and essentially learn, gain the skill, knowledge, and at the end of the day achieve their course and unit or course or exam. And if you have this as a practice, how does technology help you in doing so? Is what we are also going to look at when we talk about, inclusive teaching and learning. So technology can come to our aid, wherein you are able to give exercises, knowledge check activities. Nowadays, if you see in schools, a lot of schools have employed softwares like Mathalytics. You have BBC Bite Size as a website wherein teachers are able to set homework and give additional work to students, which can do practical or exercises which will allow them to refresh some of the concepts which have been studied in class. And in some cases this allows learners to get additional benefits of let's say more practice, but using technology as a aspect of doing it. So in this unit, what our main aim is to look at what is the use of technology in education. And when we look at technology in education, this is what we're going to study. Now, this unit has four learning outcomes. So we are going to cover this unit in 5 sessions. One of the first sessions would be looking at learning outcome one, which is today. Then tomorrow we are going to look at learning outcome two. Next week, we're going to look at learning outcome three and four. And a week after that, what we're going to do is do an assignment discussion session for this particular unit. And when we look at the presentations that I share with you, what we are going to do is obviously look at covering some of this part of the indicative content which has been given to ensure that you have a good understanding and a solid foundation in terms of reading into this particular unit. So if we are to look at the presentation which I will share with you, this is what is up on Moodle, and what we are going to do is basically look at the process of starting off with learning outcome one today. And this learning outcome one would focus on these three aspects of the assessment criteria. So what we'll do is look at understanding the role of technology in supporting teaching and education. Then we look at some of the assessment criteria as 1, 2, and 3, 1.1, 2, and 3. First one, we'll look at relationships between technology and pedagogy. Then we look at the concept of lifelong learning. And then lastly, but what we look at is, going into describing the changes, the role of the facilitator is what is the role of the facilitator when we use technology. So these are the basic things that we are going to look at in the first learning outcome. Now, in order to discuss this, what I'm going to do is obviously shift you over, to a PowerPoint presentation. I will go through some of the discussions of the PowerPoint presentation in terms of understanding some of these assessment criteria and the overarching learning outcome. So let me just put this across. We'll start off with the presentation. Okay. So any questions on this so far, please feel free to ask me, okay?
No, sir, I'm clear now.
So this is the first learning outcome presentation that we're going to go through today. There are a couple of slides, but we'll go through main aspects of it so that we are able to understand some of the key details that we want to study in the role of technology in supporting education and teaching and learning. That's the aim of the unit that we've covered. In the indicative content, obviously we have to understand some of the bits related to what has been given in terms of the subject, which is pedagogy. What are the key concepts? And then we'll also be looking at lifelong learning. What is the role of the classroom facilitator? And then the role of education in technology. So those are the bits that we are going to study today in terms of the learning outcome one. Now, let's start off with the basic aspect of what is pedagogy. Now, pedagogy is a Greek word which stands for paidos. And this basically is a word which is come into fruition because this reflects what happens in the teaching profession. That means if I literally look at the dictionary meaning of it, pedagogy essentially means the method and practice of teaching, especially when you're teaching theoretical concepts, frameworks, and also going into research aspect of it. So if we talk about the pedagogy of science or pedagogy of mathematics or pedagogy of physics or chemistry or any other subject area, what we are talking about essentially, what are the methods and practices that teachers are going to be using in delivering that particular subject area. So when we do talk about pedagogy, what we are looking at essentially is going into details of some of the approaches which the teachers use in the class to explain those theoretical frameworks, models, and concepts so that students are able to build a foundation in terms of understanding on that subject area. Now, there are lots of different types of approaches when we do talk about pedagogy. So, for example, when we say my pedagogy is based on lecturing, but I'm lecturing currently right now for teaching and education courses. Now, what are the various routes that I'm going to be using or practices that I'm going to be using to teach and deliver this particular course? So, in my pedagogy, I'm going to be looking at taking into account, lectures. I'm going to be taking into account, self-study. I'm also going to be taking into account by going into details of some of the key indicative content of the unit. And then also it will also involve interaction and discussions with the learners so that you are able to understand the topics. And obviously, in order for you to understand this topic, what I'm going to do is provide you case studies, articles, presentations, recorded lectures, books and books extracts or relevant chapters of the extracts from the book. And they are all going to help you to study this particular unit, which is technology and education. So that is essentially pedagogy for me when I look at from my own approach. Now, Pedagogy is also act of teaching. If I have to ask you a question, what is pedagogy? You should straight away come up with the answer. Pedagogy is nothing but practice or art of teaching or act of teaching. And when we look at teaching, which teachers look at for adopting, sometimes it is to do with doing classroom-based activities. Sometimes it is to do with discussions. Sometimes it is to do with lecturing. Sometimes it is to do with taking you out to do certain activities outside the classroom. But the main aspect of the teaching here from a teacher's perspective is that you want to be able to use resources. It could be any type of resources which are going to help in the students learning about the teaching, say resources which are going to help the students essentially learn about the subject area. And these resources that you put together and the way you go about teaching would essentially be looking at helping in building understanding for the students. You would have a good idea about their background, where they come from, what culture they come from, what is the previous experience, knowledge. And this is all going to be put into the mix when you create your activities and the way you deliver, so that you are able to effectively teach and deliver the key concepts, the frameworks, the academic subject areas or theoretical concepts, so that students are able to understand and develop the skills which are required from that particular course or the unit that you're studying. Is that okay? Is that clear? Now, if I look at a particular example of, what is inclusive teaching and why do we look at inclusive teaching in particular, there are a couple of things that I want to bring in. Now, when I look at pedagogy and when I look at, for example, the aspect of inclusive teaching, what I'm looking at is one of the concepts that you're going to go into at some stage would be what I call Bloom's taxonomy, and we'll cover that in a minute. Now, what we want to do when we look at pedagogy is we want to understand the background, the culture, and what prior knowledge the learners have. And at the same time, using that knowledge, we want to include the elements into our teaching approach, which are going to allow students to get opportunities to be able to learn, develop, and gain knowledge, and essentially, at the end of the day, pass the course or pass that particular unit. So, when we look at inclusive teaching, what we want to be able to do is we want to create an environment which is going to be tolerant, which is going to be conducive, which is going to be useful for the learners, and everybody would feel welcomed. Everybody would feel that they are getting equal opportunities to be able to achieve and understand certain areas of concept. So when we look at inclusive teaching and we include that in the pedagogy of our, which is basically the act of teaching, what we are trying to do is provide equal opportunities for all students to be able to learn and achieve, thereby also protecting the vulnerable. If there are students which have disabilities or need additional guidance or additional, let's say, support, then they are not discouraged from it. They are not made fun of in the class. They are given the opportunities and the resources to be able to learn just like a normal student would learn. And in such cases, when you make sure that your classroom is providing opportunities for all types of learners from irrespective of their background, culture, then in that case you call that methodology as what is called inclusive teaching. Is that okay? Any questions on this? Is that okay?
No, sir, clear.
Yes, that's okay.
Now, one of the things that we would look at when we do talk about inclusive teaching, this is a picture which, or a diagram which basically talks about inclusive teaching or inclusive pedagogy. And the reason why this happens is that we need to make sure that we are taking into account the climate in which, how the settings are done, when you prepare your classroom, what is the content that you're going to deliver, and at the same time, what are the various resources and let's say subject areas that you're going to deliver, the details in that subject area that you're going to deliver, which will allow your teaching to be effective. Now, when I say resources, if I go down into a bit of detail, which are covered in some of the other units, we will be looking at things like schema work, lesson plans, and how do we prepare classrooms for the purposes of managing behaviors. They would all be a part and parcel of what is called the pedagogy. Because if I look at a teacher in a primary school or a secondary school, what you generally see is there are teachers and there are what are called teaching instructors or teaching assistants. And teaching assistants help in the preparation of the classroom for the teaching to happen. So they could mean that they could prepare PCs if you have a classroom based session today, which is going to involve practicals, and students are going to be required to sit on PCs. Then they will ensure that the PCs have the right activity on, they are logged into the right screen, all the pieces are working, the grouping has been done in such a way that the students are able to sit on the PCs, and then the activities and the tasks which are put together in a way which allows the sessions to be meaningful. And that is what the role of the teaching instructor is going to be, or teaching assistant is going to be. And at some stage, you are also going to see that the teacher who comes in, she would essentially be looking at providing maybe activities which will benefit and complement what the learners are asked to do. And that is what you are going to be looking at from a point of view of preparation of classrooms. And in such cases, the role of teaching assistant and also the role of the teacher would be very clearly defined. Now, if I go into the couple of things which are related to the overall aspects of what is the use of technology in education, these are the bits that we look at. So one of the things, one second. So one of the things that we look at, that we talk about is how does technology, facilitate learning, and when do we see the role of technology being incorporated into learning? Now, there have been various scientists and obviously various people who have worked essentially over the years, and there are various models which have been proposed. Now, one of the things that you would look at is this particular theory, which is called the constructivist theory of learning. Now, the constructivist theory of learning is a theory which was proposed by Vygotsky in 1978. And the crux of this theory is that it emphasizes the importance of social interaction. And one of the key words that we use in education quite a lot, which is called scaffolding technique. Now, what does this mean when we talk about constructivist theory? Now, here, what we look at essentially is that he did his research, and in the studies that he did, he came up with the fact that when learners need to put together things and learn and gain knowledge, what they do is they passively put together information which is going to come from the experiences that they have had and what they see happening in and around in their environment. Now, this helps them build their own representations of how they perceive, knowledge, and how they perceive things essentially happening within the point of view of, say, for example, if I look at the roof and I say, how does the fan operate, or what does it take for the fan to operate? So what will happen is, if you ask that question to learners would essentially look at first each towards each other. If they are in a group, they will do a bit of discussion. That will be social interaction. At some stage, what they will also look at is some of the material which has been provided by the teacher to say it involves kinetic energy, it involves this, it involves that, a motor, blades, and things. And then they will look at the physical functioning of the fan, and that functioning of the fan would essentially give them ideas and some knowledge by what they've read and what they've had interactions with. And that would then be shaped up in terms of, if you ask how does the fan work, that is how the learner will go about essentially explaining how the ceiling fan actually works, or how a table fan essentially works. So what they do in his theory, what he reflected on was that people, or learners in this case, learn knowledge not just from reading something, but they look at taking in passive information through social interactions, and also the aspects of what they learn from reading, and then they scaffold this. Essentially, that means they would use this information to build their own representations or own interpretations, and that would allow them essentially to then look at the process of gaining knowledge. Now, when we do look at the examples of how technology came in after the use and the coming in of the internet, what we generally see is that in the early 2000s there are lots of different types of bits which essentially started to come in. And one such example of how do you see learning happening today is, you have some parts of the teaching material available through on Moodle. You have some parts of this learning material which is available through Moodle, and that allows you to access material on terms of presentation, handouts, and let's say recorded lectures. And some part you are basically discussing and joining some of the live sessions with me to be able to learn and understand what is the content, what is the subject area, and what are we going to cover in this particular unit. So this is the use of facilitation in terms of technology. Now, when we do talk about bits and pieces related to how you can see this and being used to let's say get meaningful interpretations or meaningful results, that is what we will focus on when we look at digital technology, look at the use of technology, tools, and resources which are going to help us and help learners that are going to study with us to be able to get the desired outcomes. Now, one such example that I would give you is if you are teaching a class of, say, year seven, just say somebody who's moved from primary school to secondary school in the UK, and you're teaching a class of year seven. Now, when you teach the class, there are lots of subjects that you would teach: maths, English, science, social science, geography, history, physical education, things like that. Now, in terms of where all would you use technology, a lot of this would be using technology because for things like timetabling, when you send out communication that you send out to the parents, systems that you use in the school, which will allow you to monitor and maintain the progress of the learners, exams that you set or give to the learners, delivery of education that you do in terms of activities using PowerPoint, handouts, printing of those handouts, they are all going to use some part of technology or equipment essentially to deliver education. So what we are looking at is that at some stage, um, what will happen is that at some stage you are going to see that we are going to use it for the purposes of bringing effectiveness. That means I want to get my point across quite quickly. I want to make sure that learners have the ability to be able to, let's say, use technology to understand things better and to a certain aspect see those things to be able to reflect on when they produce evidence or work which allows them to achieve a particular grade. So when we use look at use of technology, what we are looking at is various tools and techniques, which could be equipments, multimedia, software, various interactive elements, which will allow us to essentially use technology to be able to teach and become more effective as a teacher. So in such cases, you know what we want to be able to do is primarily look at understanding that use, and there are lots of technological tools which teachers use. We use Moodle, universities use Blackboard. There are some universities and colleges which use Canvas, some of them use Google Classrooms, and these are various types of technological tools like software which allow teachers to manage course material. It allows teachers to track student progress. It allows them to provide feedback when you send assignments, when you are getting feedback on the email. This will all be used, and the usages of technology to be able to get things across. Now, if I take you, say, 20 years back, when we were studying in the classrooms, everything was paper based, right? You sat an exam that was on the paper, your examination script were checked by the teachers. It used to take a month, 2 months to be able to mark, and then you get the results. But nowadays, what tends to happen is with the use of technology, things have become digital, and what allow that it allows teachers to do is when you sit an exam, it allows them to straight away, look at marking the exams because the software would do it and they would moderate it. There's an exam board which looks at moderation to see the human intervention in such cases, and they see if the grades are accurate, the assessments are correct, and then at some stage, then it provides that feedback to the learners. Now, what it has done, it has shortened the time frame of you getting the results within 2 months to maybe 2 weeks, and that is the use of technology which has made that possible. And those are the things that we are going to look at when we do talk about the use of technology essentially in this particular learning outcome one. Now, the other aspects that we want to look at when we talk about the how does technology support teaching and learning, and how does it make us more effective, there is something called universal design of learning, which is called UDL. And this universal design of learning is something which is now being propagated, and obviously it's coming across being it is something which is being used right now, by lots of universities and teaching institutions to be able to ensure that all students get equal opportunities to succeed. So when we do talk about UDL, or Universal Design of Learning, what we are looking at here is tools which are used in the implementation of improving and optimizing the teaching and learning for all sorts of people, students, learners in a particular institution. And the goal of UDL is essentially to ensure that the teaching that is happening is becoming purposeful. It is looking into reflective aspect of it. That means when we do things with a bit of hindsight, if I knew this, I would have done this differently. And in some cases, it is also allowing teachers to become more resourceful, look at introduction of what is called action oriented tasks, which can allow learners to learn more let's say independently. And that is what we look at in terms of technology coming in to become the universal design of technology learning is now being incorporated and used to teach and deliver education, across schools, across colleges, and across universities. Now, this particular technology it relies on technology. So things like when you go to libraries today, for looking at a catalog of books, you go through a touch screen, or you use a tablet. When you're looking at submission of assignments, you actually use laptops to write it. Now you're using a word processor or some sort of a word processing software to be able to write your assignments. Now this is being used, this is nothing but the use of technology, because it is helping students to for example, research and then collect information, and then summarize it in a way which can then be used as evidence to mark and obviously grade the qualifications. So there are various usages of technology which are being experimented and have been brought in, and the use of technology with the introduction of universal design of learning guidelines in 2020 has now increased not only the let's say the adaptability and adoptability. That means it is now being increasingly adopted by institutions to be able to teach and deliver any sort of curriculum. Now, both by practitioners and both by researchers and also by learners. So practitioners are teachers who are teaching and delivering. Researchers, people who are looking into continuously going into details of understanding the use of technology and how it can help in education, and obviously learners who are taking it up from an end user point of view to use it to become more effective, more productive, and gain knowledge and skills more quickly and efficiently in terms of learning certain types of, let's say, courses or skill-based courses. Now, one of the other things that we also look at is that technology is good, yes, but it also poses a lot of challenges. And it means that the learning curve, for example, if I say that in my college, if we introduce a system called Blackboard, one of the things that we'll also have to do is take the learners through understanding how they would use the Blackboard. So learning curve to understand the use of new software will also increase time and efforts required to be able to learn. So this could be one of the challenges. Sometimes what happens in companies is that if the companies decide to switch from Windows 10 software to Windows 11 software or Windows XP, when they switched over to something else, there was a lot of resistance to people taking up the new software, because they said we are absolutely fine with this, but why do we need to upgrade? But with times, as technology become obsolete, you also need to upgrade. And when upgrades happen, there's a lot of training, learning, development which needs to be done, because not everybody has the same capacity and the patience to be able to learn new things. So in such cases, technology can also pose challenges, and these challenges essentially tend to be challenges which can, apart from technology supporting teaching and learning, it will also create challenges which will be termed sometimes as what is called digital divide. Now, there's a gap between who can access technology and who should access technology. So if there was somebody, when I look at my own kids going to school, they are learning most of the things, PCs and labs and tablets and other bits are a part and parcel of their schooling. And they are, let's put it this way, comfortable with the use of these devices. But if I go 20 years back when PCs were introduced, We were asked to go into the classrooms. We were, going into a classroom which was air conditioned. We had to keep away everything outside to make sure that dust does not go in. Or when we had different types of technology, when we had a floppy disk of 1.5 inch or 5.5 inch, and touching the media could have spoiled the media. So in such cases, there was a lot of learning to be done, adaptability to be done to be able to use technology. So in such cases, what you're going to see is that you are going to have challenges which the technology would also provide. Now, one example is that accessibility to the internet is not consistent all across the world. Now, Elon Musk and some of the other, companies are looking at providing space internet, or through the Starlink, they're providing internet so that each and every corner of the earth has accessibility to the internet. Now, in places wherein there is no internet, it is not possible for learners to log into YouTube or use online learning. So, in such cases, technology has not reached that location, and that is where this could pose a challenge that learners still would need to go into and look at old school, which is paper and pencil based things or pen based things to be able to learn. And in some cases, household incomes, income levels, and the quality and accessibility to technology might be an impediment which would pose a challenge for education to be delivered. So when you look at countries in Africa, underdeveloping or countries wherein there is income level is an issue, affordability of PCs is an issue, then in such cases it can pose a challenge, and that is where the technology needs to be integrated, needs to be more made accessible. In some cases, you look at charities providing free PCs and different types of Raspberry. I don't know whether you've heard about a PC called Raspberry PC, which is a $30 PC, which allows people in countries or students in countries, underdeveloping countries or underdeveloped nations, to be able to use PCs to be able to learn things in technology. So those are things which challenges can pose challenges to technology through technology, and those challenges in technology can obviously be challenges in education as well. So that is where a balance has to be created, an effective use and integration of technology which has to be done in order to align the educational goals with the learning goals of the learner, thereby replacing some of the traditional methods without creating challenges for learners to be able to learn something. A simple example that I would give you here is that if I have a learner who's not very, let's say, um, not very skilled with use of PC, then in some cases, what I would need to do is provide activity and exercises so that they are becoming, or the learner becomes confident with the use of PC. But that would require a bigger learning curve. That means I would need to spend more time, give more resources, and also ensure that there are enough activities for the learner to be able to become confident and comfortable with the use of IT. Now, in such cases, as a teacher, I need to be able to look at balancing the decisions I make so that the learner is given the opportunity, but at the same time, given the additional time to be able to become comfortable with the use of technology. So, in such cases, we have to look at balancing the educational goals and the outcomes that we want to achieve, and see where we can put in technology to be able to help meet that educational goals and obviously achieve those learning outcomes which the learner is actually intending to do. And that is where we would say that technology in education is important, and the use of technology allows education to become more inclusive. I can use technology to support and bring improved learning outcomes in that particular learner, or for that particular learner. Is that okay? Any questions on this so far?
No, sir.
Okay, now let's look at some of the the various assessment criteria which are given. Now, one of the first assessment criteria which talks about is examine the relationship between technology and pedagogy. Now, here is where we need to look at the act of teaching, and where technology helps us in the act of teaching, or how do I do teach in the classroom. How does technology come to my aid in terms of ensuring that my learners are able to gain, and obviously gain the knowledge which is required for the purposes of attending my class. Now, technology in this case would be used as a tool, and that tool essentially would allow us to teach and deliver what I'm wanting to teach and deliver. So, in this case, theoretical frameworks, models, examples, application, in a way which will allow learners to, gain knowledge and obviously skills required, like yourself in this case, for this particular unit. Now, if I look at the relationship between technology and pedagogy, one of the first things that I would look at is specialist knowledge. The reason I put specialist knowledge is because when I look at technology, I look at technology to be able to teach something or give an idea of something which I cannot explain just in merely in words. An example that I would give you here is that if I were to show you a video, that if I was to explain, say, for example, one of the things which I was doing over the weekend was looking at how the human heart beats. Now, if I explain to you what is the structure of the human heart and how it beats, if I was a biology teacher, then in such cases, I can only describe it, by words, but that might not have that impact in terms of gaining the required understanding at the student's end. So in such cases, what I would use in my pedagogy is use a video or a video from the YouTube, which would show how the heart actually works. So maybe a 3D rotation of the heart, that it is consisting of two chambers. It has three aorta, the left and the right side of the heart and things like that. Now, excuse me, if I show this with a video, then it will allow the learners to gain a bit more understanding, and it will allow the learners to engage a bit more. It will show a lot of interest from learners. Oh, this is how a heart looks like, this is how it beats. And visually seeing something would mean that they would be more excited, more interested in gaining that part of the information. So the use of videos, specialist equipments, for example, in the case VR, virtual reality, would be something that I would be using in my teaching techniques to enable learners to understand the, let's say, the functions of how the heart beats and how it pumps out blood to the body and purifies the blood in the body. And this is an example of how the technology would help in me being more effective as a teacher in my teaching in the class. Now, the second way that I would look at is learner engagement. Now, sometimes we do classroom based activities. The reason why we plan classroom based activities is primarily because of the fact that, when I say classroom based activities, it gets the students interacting with each other. It basically allows them to start working together in groups, small groups, and it shows engagement, it shows creativity, it allows them to use their cognitive skills to be able to bring it together to solve a particular problem. So when I look at classroom based activities, my main aim is to look at learner if I give them the task that, okay, in the schools now, some of the schools, like in my kid, they've introduced a 3D printer. Now, one of the activities which was given after a particular demo in a session with them was to say how to use the 3D printer and print out a small object using the 3D printer. Now, this involved a lot of learner engagement in the use of technology. So first, we had to give them instructions of how to use the printer, what the printer is capable of, how you need to give the command, what you need to be careful of. And once that was done, we allowed them to actually go about and print a 3D object. Some of them printed a keychain, some of them printed a bracelet, some of them printed, say, for example, their nameplate and things like that. This allowed interactivity, engagement, and discussion to happen amongst students. And this allowed, in a way, with the use of technology, they understood and obviously understood that, okay, 3D printing can allow so many things to happen, but at the end of the day, it allows them to put their creative and cognitive skills to use. And in doing so, they come together, it becomes more enjoyable, more interactive for them to be able to learn things. Then we talk about experiential learning. Now, technology can also help in doing learning through experience. Now, when we look at asking them to try out hands-on activities, things like facilitating an experiment. Now, one of the things that we've all done and we remember in the schools is that if you go into a chemistry lab and you want to do some tests, it involves experiential learning. You have to put certain things together, mix certain chemicals, and it then brings out certain output. When you look at doing something on a computer, and CAD and CAM is one of the subject areas which today's students are learning in secondary school, year 7, 8, 9s, and 10s. they are using computer assisted design software to be able to create structures or diagrams, and that is allowing them to experience how bridges are made, or how, for example, things look in a 3D structure. And this involves the use of technology and technological software, and this allows experience, the learning to be experiential. That means they're trying to do something using simulation, and that simulation is allowing them to gain knowledge about how things work, and that is experiential learning. So this is again the relationship of pedagogy, which is my act of teaching as a computer teacher, by allowing them to do and use computers for simulation, and brings about the process of experiential learning. Then we talk about kinesthetic principles. Now, what is kinesthetic? Kinesthetic is something that you would have learned when we talk about the VARK style. Have you heard about the VARK style? VARK
Uh,
learning styles?
which type?
VARK, VARK, VARK learning styles.
Okay.
Okay. One of the things that we are going to look at some stage would be to talk about what is called learning styles. Now, when you work with students and when you teach as a teacher, one of the key things that you do in your initial assessment is to also look at understanding how does the learner learn, how does the student learn, because there are various ways through which learners can learn. Things like visual. Some learners are visual. They see something, they have a photographic memory, they see something and they can remember. Some of the learners learn by auditory. That means they are more tuned to listening and speaking and interacting, and they would learn more quickly if they were able to interact with somebody, talk to somebody. Then there are learners who read and write, and that tends to be one of the clear ways of for them to learn. Sometimes when you have to learn something, what you do is you read and you write it in your own words, and that allows them to learn about things and remember things much more effectively. And then some of the learners are kinesthetic. That means they have a tactical way of learning. They want to do and try out things. They want to experiment with things, and that is where it allows them to learn. So if I tell a learner that you need to, for example, assuming we were having a track and field event, and on a PE day, we asked the learners, let's look at long jump. So how long can you jump? Now, one of the things learners would do is some learners would say, okay, I think, I can jump up to 1 meter. Some of them will say that, okay, I need to try it out because I've never done this before. So in such cases, when you see learners who want to try it out and see how long can they jump, they would be termed as kinesthetic learners. So kinesthetic learners typically tend to be learners who learn by gestures, hand activity, or activity that they can try it out physically themselves. And in such cases, movements become important. And these kind of learners are called what are called kinesthetic learners, or their learning style is primarily termed as what is called kinesthetic style of learning. Now, these are work styles which will come across, in some of the units that we will go through. And this is used as one of the questionnaires to do initial assessment to understand as a teacher, my learners in the class, if I have 20 students in the class, how do they learn? What is the most effective technique in which the learners would learn? Some of them are visual. If say 50% are visual, 50% are auditory, then you would use your activities and plan your sessions in a way wherein it has both such activities involvement, wherein you're talking to them visually and you're talking showing them things visually, and you're also talking to them by doing activities, and that would be allowing learners to learn in the techniques in which they are more comfortable with. So technology comes to our aid when we look at touching things, when we look at doing physical activities, and these physical activities can be done using equipment like projector, touch screens. Sometimes you would see in nurseries and in primary school, you would have a touch screen wherein the teachers would encourage students or children to come in and play on the screen by writing it, or maybe have a tablet. And that would be because they're trying it out, but they're also trying it out using a technology. Now, one of the key things that we want to look at is Bloom's taxonomy. This is an important concept that we need to be aware of, a theoretical concept which was essentially a framework developed by Bloom. And this framework is applied across, primary and secondary schools, and in general, in the process of teaching and learning. Now, this framework, when he came across with a tiered structure or a pyramid, which essentially meant that, learners typically learn when they look at, going through various phases in which how they remember things and how they look at essentially, taking things further. Now, he came across with these six, I would say pyramid shaped pillar, aspects. The first aspect when you do learning is to try and remember. That means people at this age, when I look at young children, they are asked to remember. You play with flashcards and activities that will allow learners to remember. So, this is a vegetable, this is an animal, this is a dog, this is a cat. So, you are realizing and doing things which are going to be basically for the purposes of recognition and knowing that these are facts. After you start remembering things, you go up to under building your understanding. And understanding means wherein you are able to understand the facts, analyze them, and use them in various situations of communication. After you understand facts, you go to application. You are able to now observe rules. So, for example, when children go from nursery to say class 3, class 4, they understand that I have these rules which I need to abide by. Or, for example, if I need to take a break, I need to raise my hand, take a permission. I just can't walk out of the class. And then here is where they start to develop ideas and concepts. At a later stage, once you're able to apply, you also try to analyze things. You break down information into parts, and this information breaking down into parts allows you to, let's say, crystallize your learning, make it more effective. And then you have evaluation. At lots of years of experience, you are able to evaluate ideas, information, and then finally you go into the act of creation. That means you want to experiment, you want to try out things, you want to put things into action, and that is what you essentially do when you talk about the aspect of creation. Now, Bloom's taxonomy, why is it important? Bloom's taxonomy is important because at any given stage, when we look at these are grouped into three hierarchical activities, one, two, and three. Now, this allows us to break the education which the learners are going through into certain sort of hierarchical levels. And when we do talk about hierarchical levels and the list, what it allows teachers to do is plan the delivery of their sessions in such a way that they can break down the curriculum into smaller learning objectives, into assessment activities, and into activities which can lead to learning. And that is why the Bloom's taxonomy is very important. So, this was something which Bloom proposed in the 1950s. There have been a number of revisions which have happened to this particular theoretical framework, and the last one was done in 2001, which basically broke it down into six areas, where and how learning actually happens. So learning starts with the aspect of developing knowledge, then comprehension, then application, then analysis, then synthesis, and then finally evaluation, which is what we need to understand when you plan activities, when you plan your sessions, when you do the teaching and delivery. You need to be able to understand what are the skills of my students, what are the previous experiences, where they come from, what kind of attitude they have towards learning, what emotions they go through, what are their feelings. And if you have awareness of all these things, then it allows you to plan your sessions much more effectively. And that is why Bloom's taxonomy is one of the strong pillars that you need to be aware of as a theoretical model when we do talk about the aspect of pedagogy and teaching and learning, or inclusive teaching and learning in the classrooms. Is that okay? Now, there are lots and lots of other areas. So, one of the areas which I want to mention is scaffolded learning. Now, I don't know in terms of if you've come across this particular term, but when we talk about scaffolding in education, it is a technique which basically helps the student to learn by providing them temporary support so that they can help in completing tasks and acquire skills. Now, this particular model was initially, proposed by Vygotsky, and he did a lot of work in terms of bringing this concept out. And this concept, allows the teachers to understand that what is the zone of proximal development, which is called ZPD, the zone of proximal development, which is where the teachers need to bring the learners across so that the learning can then happen on their own. That means learners at some stage can start doing self-managed learning, and in such cases, all the teacher has to do is if you start somebody from say zero and you bring the learner up to a level 5 or a 6, then after that the learner is able to take on the process of learning themselves by experimenting, by interacting, by engaging with other learners. And that particular zone to which you bring the learner across is called the zone of proximal development, or ZPD. Now, scaffolding is used in all subject areas at all levels and in all areas of teaching. Now, the reason why this is used is scaffolding allows the teachers to share new information and demonstrate how to solve a problem. Now, for example, if I put it this way, that if I was to look at teaching students English, then at some stage, what I would do is I would provide the students with a variety of material. That could be reading material, listening material, writing material, and speaking material. And in order for them to develop reading, listening, speaking, and writing, I might support that with giving them handouts, novels to read, or scripts to see. Or, for example, in some cases when students are learning a language, we also recommend that why don't you watch movies? If you're learning Spanish, then watch movies in Spanish with subtitles, because it allows them to gain new information. So, scaffolding as a technique involves modeling and demonstrating, asking questions, and then putting it into practice or group practice along with other students, which allows the learners to learn how to solve complex problems. Now, this is a method wherein scaffolding means you are adding small bits and pieces to it to get to a stage wherein then the student can actually start learning on its own. So it's a classroom teaching technique in which instructors, teachers, lecturers, tutors deliver lessons in small segments, with providing them support that allows them to master concepts, or master that particular unit or that particular curriculum. Is that okay? So it is a classroom teaching technique that you need to understand, wherein we teach things little by little, which allows the learners to amass the knowledge, gain the skills, and obviously at some stage start putting, or start using those skills and the knowledge that they've gained to learn furthermore. And that is what is essentially, scaffolding. So this is very important as a concept, and we use this quite often, within the process of talking when we talk about pedagogy and the importance and relationship of pedagogy with technology in education. So a simple example that I would give you for scaffolding would be that if I was to teach you something like, let's say, a pivot table or how to do mail merge on Microsoft Word, I might not be able to teach that to you in one go, because it might be too much for you to intake. So what I will do is I will teach you that in 3 or 4 parts. So first, how to use Word, how to prepare something for mail merge, how to have a database, and how to have a template that you will be sending across. And then at some stage, then I'll show you by practical example how mail merge happens. And then if I show that to you 3, 4 times and allow you to independently carry out that task, at some stage you are going to learn that. So scaffolding is basically using, or using this technique called scaffolding, which is to teach you in small segments, to tell you how to do mail merge. And once you have learned the full part of it, that would allow you to confidently start doing it yourself. And that would be the role of technology. And sometimes when we use and teach you something in technology, how to use a PC, or for example, one of the other weeks I was teaching my mom how to use Facebook. So the first thing I had to do was, I can't teach her from how to open an account to post and see the post and like the post and post a video. I had to do that in smaller bits, and that is scaffolding. I hope that's clear. Is that okay? Any questions on this so far?
So, sir, I got all the points.
Good stuff. So I've drawn up a summary table for you of various things that you need to understand when we talk about technology and relationship with technology as far as that is concerned. This summarizes this with a bit of an example for you to go through. Now let's go across to the second assessment criteria. Talks about the concept of lifelong learning using technology. Now, one of the things that we look at, in learning is called lifelong concept of learning, because we are learning throughout our life. We there is not I can't say that I've learned everything today. There is bits and pieces that you learn everything, learn about new things every day, and that is what constitutes your experience and obviously your skills that you have over the years that you've gained. Now, introduction to lifelong learning, is primarily that when we talk about learning itself is a continuous process, and this process can be voluntary, this can be self-motivated, and this can be sometimes personal and academic. Now you're doing this course, you're doing learning, but this is a part of your learning because you have prior qualifications, you're learning a new qualification, and this is to help you to become an effective teacher. So this is a part wherein you're doing assisted learning, wherein you're taking lectures, you're reading some material, you're studying with a particular center, and that is going to be related to helping you to pursue bigger, let's say, goals in your life. Now, when we talk about lifelong learning, what we are saying is here the idea is that people should be continuously able to pursue knowledge and gain skills throughout their life. Now, this could be done through personal efforts or it could be done through professional efforts. When you get into training through our organization and your company puts you to training, that is professional reasons that they want you to be more effective, more productive, and that is why they have put you into a training or a training seminar that you go for 1 day, 2 day, 3 day, or 5 days or whatever. But when you learn things yourself, for example, if I'm learning to speak French, this is one of my personal goals, or I kept a New Year resolution that I want to learn to speak French, and I'm chipping away by learning French every day on my own efforts, by spending my own time. This is more or less personal learning. Now, this might not be related to my place of work, or it might not be professionally required, but what I'm doing is essentially learning a language because this is something that I crave, or this is something which I've set a target for myself. And in this case, I'm personally doing it. I'm not taking any external support or help, and I've collated the resources, bought a book, bought a dictionary, and I look at some of the resources which are online, and that allows me to learn at my own pace, and that is personal learning. Now, what do we want to do is we want to understand the role of technology in lifelong learning, or in the concept of lifelong learning. How does technology help me? Now, there are lots of softwares. Sticking to that example, when I talk about, there is an app that I've downloaded, and that app allows me to, use it for learning new words and vocabulary in French. Now, that is the use of technology. I can use and buy flashcards, I can buy a workbook, but what that app allows me to do is replace that workbook and flashcards by using that app. I can actually quiz myself and obviously see if I've developed that understanding, if I understand the word, and have I gained more vocabulary by learning new words from that particular app. So this is the use of technology because technology helps me in reaching out and getting hold of resources without having to go out to a library or buy things from the market. So in this case, technology is essentially revolutionizing the way I'm learning language. Wherein in the olden days, if I go back 15, 20 years back, I had to join a school, attend classes maybe twice a week, and then it was more paper based and I had to get homework. I used to get homework or handouts, and those handouts or workbooks I had to complete, go back and then start. Today I can do that online using the app, and that allows me in the access to a personal tutor to interact with that tutor, and also I can do this outside the classroom, and that is what is the use of technology in helping me to learn. Now, where do I connect this to the concept of lifelong learning? So when I say technology plays an important part in learning, I need to now connect it to lifelong learning. Now, lifelong learning is, if you ask me, I got to use emails in 97 or 99. Now, today I'm still using it. So what has happened is over the years, this has helped build my digital literacy, and I can now say that I'm an expert user of emails because over the years I've gained so much experience. I've written, I don't know, thousands and thousands and millions of emails, which has allowed me to become a master of how to use this particular software. So, what has technology done in this case in the concept of lifelong learning? It has helped me build digital literacy, which allows me to perform various functions with emails: reply an email, forward an email, archive an email, delete an email. And I'm a proficient user of how I can use emails to communicate and send messages across to my fellow colleagues, to people who are outside my organization, and things like that. It also allows me to collaborate. It also allows me to look at productivity because I don't need to write letters now. If, for example, I was served a ticket by the council for parking, I don't need to go out and represent and make a letter and then post it. I can send an email with a proof that I had got a parking token, and this is where the ticket has been given incorrectly, and that can be all done electronically through the use of technology. So the concept of lifelong learning and technology has become intertwined. That means today I use technology in most cases to be able to do my work. Now, if I talk about education, one education concept called MOOCs, which is massive open online courses platform created by some of the big, online providers of courses globally. Coursera and edX are American companies. FutureLearn is now acquired by Arden University, is based in the UK. They are able to provide free courses to students through the online initiative, and this allows learners to learn online at their own pace, at their own speed, in a flexible manner from the comforts of their own homes. And this is nothing but lifelong learning. So learning that I'm doing on my own pace, allowing me to fit my studies around my work, my family, other things that I do in my schedule, is nothing but the use of technology helping in what is called lifelong learning. Is that okay? Now, how do you understand this a bit more? What I would do is primarily, give you one or two articles to read, because this is where you need to understand the aspect with the, applicability of this happening within, I would say, education. And what I would do towards the end of the slide, in which I have put some articles in for you to be able to go and, read those articles, which will allow you to understand the concept of lifelong learning, and why it has become important. And this is something that I would say would give you an idea in terms of how you need to look at interpreting this particular learning outcome. There is another a very good article which I have provided, that you will see on Moodle later today after this, which is primarily focusing on what is called the impact of technology in education. And the reason I would say you need to go about and read that article, which I'll show you in a second, is going to give you, a good understanding of how how lifelong learning is now being supported by no lifelong learning is being supported by technology. So let me show that article to you as well. And that is what I would suggest that you need to go ahead and read, so that you are able to understand in a bit more detail this particular second assessment criteria, which is the use of technology for lifelong learning in education. So this particular article, Impact of Technology and Lifelong Learning, is an article which has been published recently. And I would suggest that you need to go ahead and read and understand why is it that technology has become an integral part of how we learn, or how do we learn at a self-paced manner. That means I'm depending on the age group that you're in, you'd be learning at your own pace. If I was in the early 20s, my learning capacity or grasping the idea of learning would be much sharper, and that is what I would suggest that you need to look at when you look at this particular assessment criteria, which is impact of learning, for the purposes of lifelong gaining life knowledge for your life. Now, any questions on this?
No, sir.
Okay, let's look at lastly the role of facilitator. What is the role of facilitator in a classroom in general? Now, we'll come to the word technology later, but let's look at the role of facilitator. Now, who is a classroom facilitator? Any ideas?
Classroom facilitator means the technology we are using as a gadgets, electronic gadgets like laptop, projectors.
Yeah, so facilitator is somebody who's going to, so if I look at the meaning of the word facilitator, basically would be a person or somebody who is going to, be assisting you, and that would be the facilitator. Something or someone who facilitates something. That means something that they can bring across. They will help you, or they would essentially enable that for you. That role or that function is called, the function will be facilitating, and the role the person performs will be a facilitator. Like, for example, a simple example that I would give you is, if you're going up for a holiday and you go to the airport and you need a wheelchair, a chauffeur will essentially, or a porter will essentially bring a wheelchair to you. So he becomes the facilitator because he sees that you have a need and you are disabled and you cannot walk. So what the porter will do is basically bring that chair to you, a wheelchair to you, and that would be the facilitator. What is the role of the porter? He's acting as a facilitator. The wheelchair is going to give you the access to be able to come into the airport or go up to the check-in counter, and that would be the equipment which will help you facilitate mobility, and that would allow you to go up to the counter to check into the flight. Now, here, what we are looking at is the role of facilitator. So, a classroom facilitator would be somebody who is going to help you in terms of, say, for example, let's put it this way. If I share my screen back to the presentation. So the facilitator is going to be here who is going to be, helping you in maybe getting a content, delivering a content, or the role the person is going to play is basically help you in getting hold of something that will help you learn and grasp that particular lesson. So facilitators could be providing informations face to face in through the online route as I'm doing. It could happen in a group when you go do a group activity, or it could be when you're reading a magazine or reading an article on your own, and that article is going to give you the knowledge and required, information to be able to do certain amount of work. Example again I will give you is when you buy something from IKEA. I think a lot of us have bought furniture from IKEA. You get the furniture and you'd get it delivered, and what happens is when you have it delivered, you get a manual along with it in terms of how to assemble the furniture. That manual is acting as a facilitator by giving you the guidance or the steps to assemble that particular piece of furniture. So the manual becomes the facilitator. But now what we are talking about is how do we look at the role of technology as a facilitator? So facilitators could be people who are teaching assistant, people who work with teachers, assessors, lecturers, instructors to be able to help in delivering the teaching and learning, and they make the process of learning easier. They will allow you to get things, tools, objects which will allow you to make it easier for you to learn. They would help in maybe providing things which are going to help you in communication, and these facilitators would in general help in improving your learning environment by acting as mediators, if I put it this way. If you were working, say, I'm just going to think of a random example. If you're working as a plumber, for example, and you are working somewhere on a site and you need a bit of help, so you would have your assistant who would come in and say, okay, pass me that tool or give me that tool. He's going to act as a mediator because you have tools in your van. And when he needs them, what he will do is ask you to go and get that tool because he hasn't, envisaged the use of that tool initially. So he might ask you to say, go and get the pipe wrench, go and get this additional pipe, or go and get that. And that would be the role of the facilitator because you're working on a site on a particular problem and you need help. And that person who's providing that help or mediation will act as a facilitator. Now, how do we say that technology comes to the aid of, facilitation? What is the role of technology acting as a I would say a facilitator? So when we talk about technology, acting as a facilitator, can you think of what could be such examples wherein it acts as a facilitator? Any ideas? Any rough ideas? So in this case, an example is that if I was given a task by my boss or by my manager to say, can you prepare a handout which we will use in tomorrow's meeting? So what you are going to do is you are essentially being asked to prepare a presentation. And when you have been asked to prepare a presentation, what you're going to use is Microsoft Office or Google Docs to be able to prepare that presentation. And that software, which is Google Docs or Microsoft PowerPoint, is going to act as a facilitator because it will allow you to put your thoughts in and prepare a presentation which will be used tomorrow in a meeting to maybe deliver training or discuss something within the team. And in order to do so, this particular aspect of technology which enhances your ability to be able to make a presentation. You can also make a presentation by writing a few points down on a piece of paper. But when you make this as a PowerPoint, that means it is emailable. You can open it on a projector. You can actually share it with some of the other colleagues who are coming for the presentation, prior to their attending so that they can go through the slides. And this part of technology, which allows this interactivity, this presentation to be made, to be shared, to be emailed, would be the role of technology as a facilitator in terms of, I would say in teaching and learning. So when we talk about the role of technology in teaching and learning, what we need to be thinking of is how does it facilitate the delivery of education as far as the teaching and learning is concerned. So again, I've got one or two very good articles which I would ask you to go through as an example, and these examples would essentially, tell you very clearly that how does technology help in this particular process of facilitation when we talk about teaching and learning. So let me quickly show those two articles to you. And I would suggest that at some stage, if you go through these two articles, it will give you a very good idea in terms of how you would be looking at using technology from a point of view of role of, facilitating this particular role in teaching and learning. So one of the first articles that I've got is this one, which is the role of facilitation in technology, enhancing learning for public employment services. Now, we need to be able to take the example of, um, you know, how we can put this, as a mediator, as somebody who's acting in the middle. So here the example is taken for public employment services. So we are acting as a facilitator, technology is being used as a facilitator to maybe provide, information about new jobs through job boards being advertised in the public sector. And this is one such example of how technology can be used to provide and disseminate information about job aspects of it in the public sector. Then the other bit that I would suggest as an article to read would be this one, which is looking at the role of technology in facilitation in education predominantly. So let me put it this way. Let me show that to you as well so that you have it. So this particular article, which says role of facilitation technology, enhanced learning for public employment services. Again, I've taken this as an example, within the same article, and my suggestion would be to look at reading this article to understand how can technology, help in facilitating dissemination of information, for public services are concerned. Now, there are lots of different, articles that you can read, related to the role of technology in facilitation. But what I would suggest is we want to keep it, firm and concise to what we are looking at for learning outcome one. And that is where I would say these two articles, although more or less being the same parts of it, are going to be useful for you to understand the role of technology and how it helps teachers, which is something which I'm going to show you again. These two I would suggest is what you need to read through to understand the assessment criteria 1.3. So let me bring that up as well. There we go. So share that. So this particular article, along with the previous one which I've shown, the impact of the role of instructional technology facilitator on teaching efficacy in classroom technology. Now, this is a case study which has been done, and obviously it's a very long case study, but my suggestion would be to primarily just read through the abstract and a couple of introduction chapter to understand how teachers are essentially using nowadays technology as a facilitator in delivering higher education within schools and within, I would say, colleges and universities. So there are lots and lots of different articles which I can provide, primarily for technology as a facilitator. But I think a couple of them that you will see up on the Moodle would be the ones that I would suggest that you need to look at in order to understand this particular assessment criteria. So the last one, just very briefly showing this to you, that you are going to be able to read, and teachers as facilitators in computer supported learning environments. So basically technology. This one is quite relevant because it talks about how technology started coming into the education system, primary, secondary, in the early 90s, and slowly and gradually we see equipment moving to software, to interactive equipment like the touch screens. And today, with the use of AI, you're going to see and read this in this particular article. So that brings us to the end of today's session. I would suggest, if you have any questions at this stage, please feel free to ask me. Any questions on today's discussion?
No, sir. Just provide all the articles through email, please.
That's fine. So what I'm going to do is, obviously, just after this session, what you're going to see upon the Moodle, it will be fully updated. And this would allow you to get hold of all the articles that I've shown for the purposes of further reading. And I will catch up with you tomorrow at 11 a.m. to start discussing learning outcome 2.
Okay, sir.
Okay, till then, thanks for joining and bye for now.
Thank you.
Saya, any questions at your end?
No, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Just checking with Saya as well. Saya, any questions at your end? Okay, no worries. If you think of any, you can also email those across to me at learnerwork@ukversity.co.uk, and I'll come back to you with additional information.